stuff. So seems like for some reason the mic wasn't working earlier. So maybe Sid, what we'll do is you share your screen and I will speak over this connection.
Perfect.
And then when speakers have to come in, we can just key them off.
Sounds good. Just tell me slide when you want the next slide. Okay. Um, so I will go ahead and begin. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to our first community research call. I'm very excited to have you here. uh, my voice is a little bit shot today. It's unfortunate. So I may be a little bit quieter, or need to clear my throat, but I hope that's all right. Yeah, so we have a full presentation for you guys here today. Our community research calls are basically our first public meeting where we'll share the progress that we've been up to and that we've achieved. And we're very excited to bring this stuff to you guys. We've had a lot of demand for opening up sort of our process and the information about our project, as well as open opportunities to contribute or to get involved. So here we go. Today we're planning on covering overview of what Manifold is, since this is our first one, and many of you may not have heard of us before or may not know sort of our vision and our mission. We want to talk about that and talk about Manifold as a whole, and then we'll get into our multimodal research direction and some of the projects that are in that research direction. We'll also get into our AI agents research direction. Those are our two main research directions at the moment, but we'll also discuss new directions and new projects, as well as some org updates and how to get involved. Okay, so I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Hirsch.
Perfect. Yeah, let's jump into it. So, just wanted to go a couple minutes over and explain a little bit about Manifold and like what this whole thing is and how it works. And some of you are very familiar, some of you are not. So Manifold basically started as like a cross institutional collaboration in like late 2020. This was amongst colleagues at various sort of well known academic institutions, and we basically published a bunch of papers across different topical areas like meta learning, multimodality, a couple of interpretability papers, and novel interpretability metrics. We even worked in some applied areas like control systems for robotics, but specifically in scenarios like space, which are underexplored. And it was a really rewarding research initiative and was quite productive. But in the past year, it's actually evolved into something else, something we're starting to call a new kind of research lab. Go ahead and go one slide forward. So briefly, I basically want to talk about what we kind of the sort of high level of what we mean by a new kind of research lab. And so, there's a couple of features that we've noticed that we can basically build into this organization and culture that's emerging to be able to do research more effectively and on more exciting fronts. That really is only possible because of the sort of technology and the period that we are living in. And so this idea of being able to build a research lab that's native for the 21st century, because you're able to sort of work with both lots of synchronous folks around the world, thanks to the sort of telecommunications tech that exists now, but also a lot of asynchronous folks. And, you can see sort of the positive result of that culture in open source, which is very much where we sit, but not just in research, across sort of development and lots of different sort of projects that have existed and have advanced the world around us. So we kind of think of this as like a very long-term experiment. We're trying to build, not necessarily like something that is just meant to exist for the next few years, but instead this evolving kind of research lab that will do fundamental research and then even try to bring some of those ideas to the world. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And so we're trying to combine sort of useful characteristics of different kinds of research groups, of open source organizations, to be able to drive much more sort of long-term thesis-driven work um, at the fundamental science level. Right now, obviously, very focused on artificial intelligence because that's the core competency that we've started with over the past few years. But also being able to work with tons and tons of people who, want to be involved, whether that's in a totally asynchronous way or whether that's sort of in a synchronous, collaborative, direct hands-on way, and use those different faculties that are available to us to basically advance as much progress as we can do. And so yeah, go ahead and go one slide forward. And sorry, folks, you'll be hearing a lot from me today, so you're gonna get sick of me. Um, so one of the interesting things that has sort of demarcated us, I think, and a bunch of the newer sort of research orgs that have emerged is that the idea is like to approach this idea of a new research lab, we try to ship research fast. That's why we're going to be doing a lot of these incremental community calls and hopefully get more people involved and provide another sort of surface for people to hear about what we're doing and just interact with us. We have been trying, and this has been an experiment that has required many iterations, but to make sure all roadmaps are public, the way that we interact with projects are public, you can see what we're working on, the issues that we're tackling on our GitHub and stuff. And I think, we'll have many calls to actions on some of that stuff later in the talks today. We operate primarily through Discord. So, the core team and everybody else also works through Discord. And we also try to put out periodic updates, not just in the form of these new events and calls and things, but also we've had this publication called the Research Log, led by Sid and Santiago, which basically covers the things that we've been working on every week. So week to week, we try to, and that can seem iterative for research, but I think it's a really cool starting point to see, get people involved and to see sort of how you can move fast while doing fundamental research. But also, we try to cover exciting things in the broader AI community, and that way, we've also had a lot of links and connections with a lot of different folks. So, yeah, these are just new ways that we try to disseminate and work on research in a more incremental, sort of fast-moving, iterative style, while trying to maintain that focus. So, go ahead and move one slide forward. So, cool. I won't spend too long on this, but I think like core to our group is this idea that it doesn't just stop at the paper, right? If there's an open source project that we can continue to support, we'll figure out how to support that. So, if there's a spin out in the sense of some technology that has been built at Manifold that can be really useful for the world, we'll figure out how to support that too. And if commercialization is the path towards that, then we can figure out how to support that too. And we sort of have one very early spin out on the works that we'll be excited to share about in the future. And then we're also sort of expanding our interests. So very concretely started in the past year, sort of agentic systems and multimodality, specifically general system, which you'll be hearing from a bunch of projects and updates around those directions today. But we're also expanding to other areas, sort of around these two sort of broad directions, but also hopefully in the future to many more. And that as we can build competencies in other fields of science, we hope to do that. And AI is sort of our starting point. Um, cool. One more slide forward. So today, at a high level, what does the Manifold community look like? I think this is useful just to know who the sort of people that you're rubbing shoulders with are and how we operate today. We kind of have this broader community, which you guys all see in the Discord. And there's tons of talented folks who are here who have collaborated on research in the past, who have worked on the core team in the past. These are research scientists, engineers from obviously very well-known companies with sort of large focuses on AI. We've had faculty involved, postdocs, PhDs from some of the best universities, which is really cool. Also, a lot of sort of acumen on engineering sits in this community, and we're excited to tap into that to scale some of our work. And also a lot of really great sort of ancillary functions around, maintaining, managing progress and projects and things like that with people who are very experienced in doing that. So it's a really rich community. There's also, it's not just ML talent. There's like some incredible mathematicians, physicists involved, engineers, and so it's a pretty remarkable community. And like really the only differentiator, and you've probably seen this about the core team, is that it's just people who are ready to sort of work in a focused way and then sort of meet synchronously, once a week. And that's really just the idea of like having that sort of drive allows us to tackle projects in a very directed way, which you'll hear about today. So one slide forward. So, and where we're headed is really interesting. So basically, we think like an organization like this can make a lot of progress, and it starts to become more of a network than it does a just a research lab on its own. So obviously, we're working on more research directions. We'll have an explicit section in today's call to cover that. We are working on spinouts, as I mentioned. But we're also working on engaging the community more broadly, right? We have a bunch of OS collaborations, so open source collaborations with other open source research orgs that are in the works, with academic labs. We very much are an open source research lab. So, I mean, primarily the way that we get to do this research is off of grants and partnerships and sponsorships. There's no like, you know, sort of commercial arm to this stuff in any serious way. It looks very much like an academic lab almost. And then in the future, part of the idea here is that, if we do build things that are fundamentally useful, we can spin them out, and Manifold can capture a very, very, very small portion of that value to continue to sort of explore and pursue more fundamental research with the world openly. So that's kind of like the organization we're hoping to get to, and we're very well on the track to that. And this is the evolution of Manifold in the past 8 months to a year. Also, we will hopefully be bringing on some sort of part-time and full-time positions in the hopefully mid to near future, and we'll have updates around that as well. So one more slide forward, so cool. Okay. Well, that's enough of the overview on like the org. Hope you get an idea. Please feel free to ask questions about anything. It can be in the chat here. The Discord is very open, and we will post all slides, all resources, all links everywhere we can. So, gonna jump into our first sort of broad research direction, which is multimodality. But specifically, we really have been focusing on generalist models, and we're excited to share why. So we'll cover sort of generalist models and sort of our Keystone project at a very high level. We'll have an update very soon on that, so won't go too deeply into it. And then we'll talk in great detail. I think Santiago will get to present about the multinet project, which we're super, super excited about. So let's jump into it. So let's go ahead and go one slide forward. Perfect. One more. Cool. So at a high level, by generalist models, we're talking about models in the flavor of what many of you may remember. Now it's been almost 2 years since that model came out. It's called Gato, which was this paper, a generalist agent, was shared by DeepMind in, I think, mid 2022, which is an AI a forever ago time. It's a different era. But the really interesting idea about this paper was that, you can train sort of an end-to-end autoregressive transformer architecture on very many modalities, including reasonable success on control tasks. So these are, robotics, reinforcement learning, simulations, that kind of stuff. And they did this really by just mapping it all in some smart ways, some kind of maybe naive ways, to sort of a batched representation of the data in the form of tokens, passing it to the model, and then very much letting the model do in a sort of traditional sequence to sequence way, predicting and sort of outputting those tokens. And they saw that it actually does reasonably well across many of these tasks. And that was a really powerful idea. So go ahead and go one slide forward, please. So that was an idea that was interesting. One, for the fact that it showed this kind of unified architecture could do reasonably well. It didn't sort of beat any benchmarks at all, but it was, sort of thought provoking that you could get to these very multimodal, powerful models. But it was never released to the open source. It was never sort of broadly released. And there have been various efforts in small parts to kind of reproduce it. A lot of it has met with struggles and failure and for clear reason. As we are working on this, we also understand some of the pitfalls here. But we basically centered, several months ago, maybe around middle of 2023, around trying to build a Gato style and scale model. So basically, trying to reproduce something like Gato for the world, and it's a big deal for an open source initiative, but it's also for something very difficult to do, and that's something I know some of our research team is probably laughing at because we've run into lots of challenges and had to learn a lot as we go along. So go on one slide. Go one slide forward. But it's worth doing in the face of the challenges that naturally exist in doing something like this, because for many reasons. One, it's just an incredible learning experience, but more meaningfully, these model categories like this hold a lot of promise, because if indeed we have really built these very powerful representation learners and they can do well across all of these tasks, you have a very powerful foundational base to do many, many different kinds of things, and you unlock lots and lots of different kinds of applications. So go ahead and go one slide forward. And so we think that we think that there's this new class of architectures that are emerging. This is all very just early sort of conceptual thoughts, and we'll have an update on Echo. I'll talk about it shortly. But basically, everybody's sort of interested in world models and all these ideas, and the idea of moving towards these kind of any to any, or sometimes people are now calling them omnimodal architectures is really powerful because again it unlocks many different sort of capabilities on the line, but grounding it in interactions and sort of action modalities in the form of these control tasks and things like that uh, also feels like it would drive a more reliability along this sort of thinking of building a world model that can reliably interact and understand the world around it. And so where LLMs kind of try to capture meaning through language generation, now we've gone to these any-to-any modality models that are trying to capture meaning through diversity, and there's even ideas around capturing meaning through sort of higher level representations within the network and semantics. We think that like this interaction modality mixed with this extremely multimodal objective uh, is sort of a very powerful framework to work on all of the above questions. And so that's why we think this is an exciting area, even though there haven't been too many big breakthroughs on this topic. One slide forward. So we also think that these kind of models can be the basis for numerous other research directions, and as a research lab, that's interesting to us, and I think that's also why it'll be interesting to the world. So you can think that there's sort of numerous applications, of course, in AI agents, which we'll talk about very concretely in a couple minutes here. Also, you're seeing similar architectures being used in all of these new humanoid robotics fronts, of which there's so many, and can likely be used. I was actually talking to some bioinformatics researchers just a few days ago, and they were excited for building sort of higher level agents for bioinformatics based on these models. So it's super interesting, and of course, it also opens up the basis for exploring questions like continual learning and other sort of fundamental AI questions within the context of a very meaningful set of capabilities in this sort of omnimodal setting. One slide forward. So cool. So mainly, I just wanted to set the stage around why we think generalist models are interesting. We are working on this a model ourselves that should cover sort of all of what I discussed, and we'll have an update for you very soon. I've included, by the way, the names of folks involved in these projects on the core team at Manifold. So feel free to always reach out and ask anybody here questions. They'll have a lot of context around what we're working on. They sit in the server and are accessible. And we think it would be huge to deliver on something like this. So excited to share progress in the near future. I think this actually sets the stage nicely for the multi-net project. So, Sid, if we could let Santiago onto the stage, I think he'll basically lead this section of the presentation. I will motivate at a very high level while you do that, Sid. That
Santiago,
uh,
I believe you should be able to step up onto the stage. Right? Okay, perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, yeah, we
Yes.
can. Santiago, give me 30 seconds, just motivate this. So, like,
Mm.
um, basically, when it comes to building a model like this, you can imagine that a lot of the data isn't sort of collectively existing, and there's lots of challenges in getting that together. And also, how do you benchmark models like this? And so, in response to that, is the multi-net project, which is sort of critical to this generalist research direction that we're working on. So, Santiago, with that, the stage is yours.
Thanks. So yeah, what we're trying to do with Multinet is basically creating the first pre-training corpus slash benchmark that actually makes sense for GATO, our research project for multimodality. And basically, for a little bit of context in here, there are three different benchmarks. The first one is Multibench from 2021 that basically has like some ideas from like uh, multimodality, but at the same time, they don't focus on what we want. So could you pass to the next one, please? And we have Multibench, uh, Bench that again you have some like control stuff, some VQA, but at the same time you have, for example, automatic driving. So that is kind of weird, and some MRI scans. Again, we're not trying to focus on that type of stuff, although it would be pretty cool if we got like results from that. And finally, we have another Bench. Could you change the seat, please? And this bench specifically is focused on images and text only. So they are leaving a lot of other modalities uh, outside of here. So even then, we can see like a lack of focus on what we're trying to do with Gato specifically for a pertaining corpus and basically a benchmark for this. So could you push it to the next one? And finally, we have the JAT corpus. JAT, if you don't know, guys, is basically the replication attempt from Hugging Face to do Gato. The main problem that they got in here is that it's kind of small. Like they used uh, Wikipedia and Oscar and conceptual captions and OKVQA. And for control, specifically, they only used like 4 different datasets that they created. But again, it's really small and they did not get like the best results with this corpus. So again, I think there is a need for another pre-training corpus slash benchmarking here because we have not seen like a Gato style pre-training corpus in here. Could you move it to the next one? So here it is this is the original Gato pre-training corpus. As we can see, like even JAT that was the most like uh, the nearest one to Gato levels, like the originally they only had like 3 different benchmarks in here for control specifically. And in here we can see like they have 596 tasks. So there's a lot of difference. And besides that, even things like with vision and language stuff, there is a lot of text and images that should be used in the model, and they basically lacked. So could you move it to the next one, please? Basically, we can see that the main problem here is that almost all of the pre-training corpus that they used is basically closed-sourced. For some of the vision and language stuff, we have basically these open source like datasets, and they're pretty good. But what we're trying to do in here is trying to like replicate most of them, or try to use alternatives to them because there are a lot of alternatives to these datasets. Could you move it to the next one, please? So specifically for language and vision, we could like basically generate this dataset right now and change some like stuff. For example, we can move massive text to use the pile, M3W to use something like Idafix or MMC4 and align to Koya 700 million. And all of the others are open source datasets. The main problem is that they are not centralized. So the main thing that we're trying to do here, specifically for language and vision, is to centralize all of these datasets so that we can use them to train Neko and benchmark other models like JAT or maybe like GPT, tiny GPT, or all of that stuff, basically. And could you change it, please, to the next one? Finally, in control, there is actually a lot of already like existing datasets for because offline reinforcement learning has started to be a thing. But the main problem is that all of the information is scattered around the internet and they don't have a standardized corp like format. So we're trying to move everything to a format that is called Minari, and a lot of it is just translation work. So the main thing that we're trying to do in here is centralize all of this information and benchmark different models for this. So yeah, that's it for me, I think. And
Great, yeah,
well, obviously, if you want to like collaborate on this, I'm super open to it, and like let me know if any one of you guys is interested in this.
If anybody in the audience has questions, please feel free to send them in the chat, or you can request to speak as well at this time.
Yeah, actually, so give me 1 or 2 minutes to talk one, like make it a little bit more actionable here. So, Santiago, great work. So basically, yeah, that's kind of a good overview of where we're at on the sort of data set collection side. And there's lots of ways that people can get involved because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of parallelizable tasks here. So on one side, we've mainly been focusing. I think a lot of Santiago's time has gone into, or is going into right now, the sort of vision language VQA side of things. If For some of the control tasks that he sort of have to do, which is mainly the conversions and collections and centralizations. We can certainly use help on that, and of course you're a core contributing member of the team then, and obviously any papers and things like that you'll be affiliated if you meaningfully contribute. Um, the other thing is as we move from data collection and model training for our first reproduction, we also do want to benchmark, and so we're working on the design of what that benchmark will really look like. But as you can imagine, a lot of models today will not perform well on this because this is a sort of a new benchmark across a very very tough set of of tasks and objectives across many modalities. So, but we can certainly use help on the profiling and sort of that sort of set of the work going forward. And then finally, there's lots of interesting ancillary, very valuable sort of research questions that emerge when you think about stuff like this, related to the weightage of the data, how that affects the model, and things like that, and tons of others, frankly. I know that we'll have a section where we talk about emerging projects, both large and small, sort of in scope at Manifold, and maybe we can talk a bit more at that point then about some of the things that we want to try. So, but please, yeah, we have a couple minutes for questions if anyone wants to ask anything, and we'll also have time at the end, I think, in general to ask questions. So I don't see anyone. So maybe Sid, for the sake of time, we continue to move forward.
Agreed.
Cool. Okay, excellent. Yeah. So that you got a sort of taste of one of the broader directions and some of the projects and the multimodal sort of generalist direction that we're pursuing. Now, I think we also have this other one, the AI agents sort of research direction. This is an interesting one. So we'll cover sort of some recent work that we have coming out soon. For all of you at a very high level, and since it's coming out soon, you can check it more closely. And then we'll also talk about tool use, which we think is a really exciting research area, and we have some emerging projects. And yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into it. Perfect. So first, just briefly wanted to give you a flavor. It's almost like a teaser for this position paper that a bunch of the team recently put together. So we have their names there: Thomas, Ben, Helen, Pranav, and Pavel all contributed to this work and really pushed this over the finish line, which was awesome. But basically, in this position paper, we over the past 8-9 months, the team has really been reviewing the notion of AI agents, and a lot of it, agents. The notion of agency today in these systems that people are calling agents is driven by the general capability of these LLMs. And so there's been lots of surveys into all the different kinds of agents that you see. There's always new projects coming out every week. And so amidst that vortex of all these different kinds of incremental pieces coming out, we kind of tried to cut through the noise and think through the limitations across many different axes of AI agents, and tried to pull on threads from fields that maybe have more rigorous notions of AI agents as well. Because as researchers, if you've been in research, the notion of an agent is not necessarily a new one. But I think the fact that LLMs have can sort of bridge through this sort of general language modality and do a bunch of interesting, useful things has led to imaginations running wild, which is a useful thing also. But we kind of like try to rigorously sort of show limitations in those areas across several sort of vectors. So memory, decision making, reasoning, tool use, learning in those systems. And then we kind of try to point out some opportunities at a high level related to some of those fundamental reasons around how language models have inherent limitations, and that while scale has released sort of or has unlocked a bunch of new capabilities in these models, we also probably want to explore other paradigms of modalities that may inherently unblock different levels of reasoning and capability that we expect out of these powerful agents. So I know this is like again an abstract essentially. I think that's intentional. We'll have the paper out in the next very soon. It's been submitted to archive and stuff, and so you'll all be able to read it. But just wanted to give a shout out to this team for this output. So cool. Let's go ahead and move forward. So briefly, I wanted to talk about this other sort of research project here, and I think yeah, Pranav is also here, so he can also always jump in and answer any questions. But basically, this notion of tool use in AI is super interesting. So can you go ahead and go one step forward? You hear a lot of different definitions of tool use, people using the terms in different ways, and there's sort of a spectrum of emerging ideas around here. So you obviously, I'm sure people here, if you're sort of certainly in the sort of function calling space, or more generally just in keeping up with what's going on in LLMs, you've heard of things like Command R or Gorilla, which focus on function calling and try to make it very systematic and reliable, and are sort of great open source examples of models that do this. Generally, the notion of function calling is well known. It's something that OpenAI provides with its sort of state of the art models as well. And so that's sort of one set of definitions that exists in this under this umbrella of tool use. Another one that people have been sort of centering around is sort of new kinds of models from the ground up that can interact with software. So you see this coming out of private labs like Adept. So on the bottom, we have the Fuyu model from them. So they're trying to build new kinds of multimodal models that interact with user interfaces and things like that. And so broadly, I think this is I think Manifold thinks this is a very interesting research direction. We've been working on some exciting stuff here that we'll have to share about very soon. But basically, all of these perspectives have certain limitations, right? Function calling requires a lot of, very clear knowledge of what exactly a tool you expect to use is. Command R, which is Cohere's model, the image on the left, tries to move this forward by allowing the model to just sort of operate tool selection as well. But ultimately, we think of Seth, can you go one slide forward? We think of tool use as an inherently multimodal problem and inherently an interaction problem, and think that like this kind of generalist objective is a good starting point or foundation to sort of work in this area. And Seth, can you move one more slide forward, please? And we think about actions and tool use differently. So, one very underexplored area is the notion of sort of cloud APIs or even APIs on your computer. Obviously, there's been projects that kind of use out of the box LLMs, like the Open Interpreter project, to try to manipulate some of these. But a lot of projects generally tend to focus on the user interface as the basis for uh, enabling AI systems to use tools and to accomplish sort of digital tasks. We're starting to trend towards, well, what's underexplored is building systems that can natively interact with computational interfaces like APIs. But this is inherently something that's both multimodal, as we mentioned, and is also a very difficult objective because tasks can be specified at sort of arbitrary length if you think of them as sequences. So collections of things to do. And so we're training models based on sort of the GIAs that we talked about, to attempt to try to handle more complex tasks in this sort of paradigm that we've very highly described here, which is, interacting not only with APIs in sort of like the function calling way, but actually interacting with the IO of that API, and then being able to reason over that to the next thing. We also think things like planning and other sort of topical, not topical, but other sort of capabilities are highly linked to this. And while right now we're exploring this in sort of an end to end, almost again like autoaggressive way, that's not necessarily the way that we think tool use will be solved in AI, but we think it's an extremely important objective, and we think there's a very underexplored region here. So we are working on basically assembling sort of the first data set of API trajectories in this fashion, release the first sort of sets of models that can do well on this front. And then, yeah, creating benchmarks to see how we can build models that can do this kind of thing. Because the closer you get to this capability, obviously it unlocks huge amounts of productivity. It would just be a big research breakthrough. So, very excited about this. Sid, can you move one slide forward, please? Yeah, so I just covered all of this, and we're actively recruiting for this. It's a very early stage project, so reach out to Pranav or me if you want to get involved. And yeah, it should be super super exciting. So go ahead and go one forward, Sid. Cool. I'll talk for a few minutes, on that topic of like, hey, we're working in these areas and we think they could be related to a lot more. I'll talk about at a very high level some of the emerging new focus areas at Manifold. And so these are usually topics that are super super early, frankly, and where we have no structure or large scale project teams pursuing these necessarily yet, but there are definitely members in the core team who are interested in various parts of these, and it's just thematically things that the team is sort of generally getting interested in. And so, certainly in the coming weeks and months, you will see both sort of specific targeted research objectives that we're pursuing in these areas, and also larger scale sort of moonshot initiatives in the pattern that you've seen, for example, in the generalist objectives. So do you want to go one slide forward first? Perfect. Yeah, so for the foreseeable future, we're primarily focused on long-term AI capabilities, and we think about this both from the fundamental sort of foundational AI perspective, which is a lot of what you heard today, as well as applications. And we will expand into more applications because for multiple reasons. One is obviously applications provide new, interesting insights, and are tied to obviously like impact in the world, but also they provide an avenue for testing out a lot of these foundational ideas that we're working on in new ways and strengthening them and then moving into new areas where they might be useful. So at a high level, we have some interest and sort of new ideas bubbling up in different architectures and primitives general representation learners. These are we're starting to explore, I think, on RNNs, and I'll give the team a chance to talk about this in a second. Exploring other architectural primitives and types as well, and then both testing those out on this kind of new generalist task set that we're talking about here, the massively multimodal one that we described, and other ones. But the idea is that we want to explore new sort of learning architectures to solve some of these objectives. A big one is meta learning, both in foundation models robotics and also sort of the theoretical aspect of it. Revisiting ideas like architecture search and traditional meta learning at scale, I think the team thinks is an interesting sort of opportunity because a lot of what we've seen in terms of scale has driven so the success of the architectures we see today. Pursuing continual learning, which is a super important factor whether you're talking about digital agents, tool use, real world robotics, and open-endedness is sort of tied spiritually to that as well. And then on the topic of agents, generally we want to push further on this autonomous agents idea because obviously the systems are getting better and better and we want to support them in getting better and better. So tackling tool use as we described, so it's really early and please, if you want to get involved, reach out about that. Also in the near future, working on long-term planning. Proactivity, the Manifold team had placed in a OpenAI hackathon a little while back, working on proactive agents, and that's something we want to revisit. And also exploring the sort of the science of agents, like what do the architectures of these agents look like, why, how do you make them more reliable, things like that. So the science and systems of autonomous agents. And then finally, applications. I mean, the team has talked about a bunch. One thing that's interesting and emerging is applying some of these architectures to biology, as I mentioned. Speaking of which, there's a couple of interesting Kaggle competitions that the team may be organizing, some sub teams to compete in. So if you're interested in competing in the Leash Belko one, and there's a couple others that we'll link. Definitely let us know. We would love to sponsor and work with people and go compete in some of these things as an entry point to exploring how some of the models that we're building could be useful in these areas. I do want to open the floor up to anybody from the core team who wants to talk about any of these interests for a minute or two. And this is your chance to, maybe convince some people to join. And if not, we
So
can also always link and communicate later. But I just wanted to give a minute in case anyone wants to raise their hand.
Definitely. And any core team member, you guys should all be able to join the stage on your own. So
Hey, cool.
Hey,
Looks like
Eric.
nobody was working. Hey, I just wanted to introduce myself to everybody and offer like any way I can help. So I'm relatively new to the core team. Joined at the beginning of this year. Came from a software engineering background, less of an academic background. So a lot of DevOps work in my career life. So if anybody wants to chat about anything related to ML ops or just software engineering in general, I'd be a good person to reach out to and would be happy to help. And also just have a perspective of somebody who's new to the core team. I can offer onboarding help because I've recently gone through it. So just wanted to jump in and say that real quick.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric.
okay, I'm not seeing any questions or anything in the chat. We can probably move forward.
Yeah, let's do it. So I think this is you, right, Sid?
Right, this is me. Sorry, just managing the presentation at the same time.
No worries.
Right. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining this first community research call. It's the first of many. So we want to open up to all sorts of new community events. We have many planned. Of course, future community research calls. These serve as our way to update you guys about what we've been up to and open opportunities. But we also are a research group, and we want to do reading groups, paper clubs, etc. We've also talked about doing hosted talks. All this stuff is going to start getting spun out in the very near future. So stay tuned. We are also recruiting. The core team is recruiting for multiple projects. Hirsch mentioned several currently existing projects that are open to recruiting. Every project that we've talked about right now is open to recruiting, but we also have some new projects as well. And in addition to that, our operations team is also recruiting. So if organizing these sorts of events, if speaking to new people or setting up the sort of infrastructure and work culture to make this sort of asynchronous, open, at scale research org work, if that appeals to you, then yeah, definitely sign up for the operations team. All relevant links will be sent in the Discord after this call is over. And of course, everything will be posted. If you guys are interested in staying in touch or getting involved in any way, we have multiple ways to do that. You can, of course, subscribe to our weekly update. We mentioned it before, the research log. This is where we sort of give our week-to-week updates on our project, as well as Santiago does a great job of covering the hottest things in AI, in AI research. So not just sort of like big picture, high level stuff, but actually gets into the nitty gritty of the research, which is great. So that comes out every week. It didn't come out this week, but it will come out next week. So if you guys want to subscribe for that, that's available on our website. You can also, of course, reach out on our Discord about any of the projects you've heard about today. Or if there are even any new projects that you want to propose, reach out. We have a system, a sort of template for new project proposals, and we're working on fleshing that out. And so we would be more than excited to talk to anybody who has any sort of ideas about that. You can, of course, check out our ongoing work on GitHub. It's all in the open. There are also issues. If you feel like contributing to any issues, you can reach out about that or drop a comment or work on it. All of that is available on GitHub through the normal sort of open source framework. And if you're interested in joining the core team, we have our core team expectations doc. I will again give the link for that as soon as this call is over. Yeah, all links will be provided. Many ways to get involved, guys. Thank you so much for attending today. Let me see if there's any slides after this one. Right. Okay. So, guys, thank you so much for attending today. You've been a great audience, and yeah.
Yeah, I think we have a few minutes for questions. So if anybody has any, please feel free to jump in, chime in, share your thoughts, and yeah, maybe a few minutes. Cool. I see. There was a message said in the chat about getting involved.
Right.
So yeah, awesome. Yeah, great to have you. So we have people of different levels and in the server in terms of their exposure to AI and their ability to sort of drive forward, state of the art research. But sort of in terms of getting involved, you can engage with us on Discord itself. Like if there's interesting things that you see happening, if you have a project that you're interested in, and you want to propose, you can propose that, as Sid mentioned. And also, just generally, you can always apply to the core team, even if you feel you're early. In your sort of experience, you can apply, and we sort of, it's a very open process. Where this isn't like something where we don't want to share what we think about your involvement or anything like that. It's something where a place where we give feedback, we get a chance to chat about a bunch of stuff, get a chance to work together briefly to evaluate if it's a good fit. And really the core team is about people who are able to sort of drive forward and get into leadership positions on these projects and generally also contribute 10 hours a week, for example, and work in a synchronous way. And I think that organizational decision sort of helps us a lot. So in terms of getting involved, I think a really great way is to start on some projects working with core team members. You can reach out to any core team member or projects that you saw their name associated with today. They also share a lot in the Discord and stuff. And if you want to sort of apply to be a core team member, you can do that. But I think if you're earlier, definitely just start to get a flavor with, maybe some small contributions on some of our projects first. And that'll naturally give you sort of insight into how research is done and the stuff that we do. The other thing that I would mention is that the operations team is also a useful vector to sort of get involved and understand AI, especially if you're coming from absolutely new stuff. So because the ops team has to deal with thinking through some of these things, understanding these topics, to be able to communicate about them, that's also another sort of high leverage way to get involved and then eventually transition into doing research too, if you want to get your beak wet just understanding concepts and things. So
I'll just throw out there, maybe as a piece of advice for anybody who's new. I think like commitment is key in these open source groups. There are people who are good at AI all over the place. What's incredibly rare and difficult to find in the context of open source groups is people who like stick around and are willing to like make a commitment and follow up on those commitments. So my advice to anybody who's new is, if you want to get involved, be that person. Who says, I want to get involved, and then gets involved and stays involved, and doesn't disappear at some point. And that ends up being huge in the context of these open groups and open research.
very well said, Thomas. Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Like Hirsch said, actually, to give a specific example of how the operations team can give you a better idea of what's going on with the research log. Every week, working with Santiago on the research log gives me a fresh sort of perspective on the latest things that are happening. So definitely, they're very tied together. And yeah, it's a great vector for entry into the research as well.
Cool. I don't see any other questions. But I believe so. This whole thing is recorded, so it'll be put on our shiny new YouTube channel. So you can check that out, and then all the links and everything will be posted, right, for people to follow up and stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And we also got a request for like a summary. So we'll whip up one of those as well and send it out.
Cool.
All right, you
Awesome.
guys. Thank you so much for attending today. You made this first event of ours a success, so I appreciate that. Yeah, have a great weekend.
Yeah, and one last note. I think we'll also have a events calendar out, right? So sometime soon, so people can sort of just see upcoming events and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay,
Awesome.
guys. Have a good one.
Take care.